information. We're trying to build some, for like the newsletter. If you haven't got one of those, make sure you get that in so we can start sending those out to people. We want to get those, a lot of information out there. That's the quickest way we see it. We're looking at every other month, every 3 months, sending out a newsletter with these little snippets of information out there. That's where some of the stuff is. And one of the good ones would be that when we find out that tax information about the woodland, that'll be in there. So, are there any other questions?
One thing is I applaud county and now coming out and asking for input. But I would suggest you send surveys out to the residents rather than depend so much on these independent needs. And I know maybe that's counterproductive or difficult, but I think you need to expand the survey. These questions you had, in my opinion, were sometimes leading or misleading and didn't ask enough follow-up questions that may help you in making a decision. And you're missing a lot of input. I think this is something that, it's great you guys are coming out and doing this, but I think this, taking information, you might want to go farther than just these needs here.
As part of it, this was part of our educational plan that was placed in front of the LCZ that they approved. Just one aspect of the plan is to have 4 meetings out in the communities for education and gathering information. So we have 4 of them here to gather information, and then we'll actually have probably 3 or 4 more before it goes to LCZ for their final approval of everything. So there's a lot of education that way too. So I do see what you're saying is try to get it out to more people. I know a couple ways we'll have to see if it's feasible to get it out and how we can get it out in a timely fashion and stuff back. That's another thing.
We got 9 people making the decision of the whole area.
Well, that's why we're trying.
That's what he's getting at.
I know, we're trying to get information to bring. There's certain things we want to see what the residents are. That's why we're trying to get people here. If we send out resident or surveys, they may or may not come in. So,
Well, if you get half of them back, it's more than 9. Yeah. I mean, 9 people are making a big decision here.
yeah.
Question 4. I now have a clear understanding that there is no such thing. This is an always and never statement, and I find that difficult to go along with. But if I put an answer down, then it suggests that I believe that. You mentioned zoning and shoreline and other things up there, and I don't have an understanding because you haven't written that.
Yeah. Well, we haven't. This was strictly about farmland preservation. Zoning. It wasn't about the shoreline. It wasn't about floodplain, any of that. The shoreline floodplain information is there. What's happening in the future. Tonight was strictly about farm pres.
So once the county's plan is certified, what's the township have to do?
They would have to readopt it. And that, we're going to be working with each town on that process. So what we hope to have put together is when we have a draft copy of the ordinance that we think will pass, we want to come back out to the communities, let them look at it, and that, because that's what everybody is going to do when they look at their maps, who wants to be in it, who doesn't want to be in it. That's what they have to base it on there, is the ordinance that's going to be. So then they look at that, and then what they would do is the town, at their town board meeting, would readopt, basically would repeal the farm pres in their town, readopt the farm pres there. All this package will come back to the county and it would go through the county board, and we would be, between the county board and our office, we end up getting it certified through DACAP. So basically, the town board is looking just at their town, what properties they wish to have in the district. I know a couple of them are probably just gonna go, okay, it's exclusive ag here, and if it meets that 80%, they're just gonna flip it over and call it farm preservation. But we want to make sure the town looks at everything, to make sure that that coincides, and that's what they want. Is at this time, if somebody else wishes to not be in farm preservation, zoning, or anything like that, they can work on that. This is the time too, is because there's no cost to the towns or the residents for this rezone. Normal rezone is $415 to come through there, but this is, the municipality is looking at it as a whole. They're doing a one rezone basically of the town. So there's no cost. And what we want to do is be able to bring these all within a couple month period to land conservation and say this is, so they can look at them all. Each go, okay, this is what they're on. And there will be additional meetings for that with the towns, but it would be like 1 or 2 townships together, and they would be at, you can have it just before your town board meeting. If some of you guys are closer to Wausau, we can do it in Wausau. You know, it's more personalized. It's not where we're going to have 8 townships try to get one time. We're going to work with that town's schedule because it'll be between myself. Kurt might be involved a little bit. Lane will be involved heavily. Angie will also be involved pretty heavily with those meetings. So, is that kind of it?
Yeah, what, if, say there's someone that's, in farmland preservation now, and they're not meeting compliance, and they wanna get out, is there a fee or anything?
Right now, if you're under just exclusive agricultural zoning, you have not signed any kind of agreement or anything. There's nothing, you're not getting out of anything. You're not really tied in. That's the nice thing about exclusive agricultural zoning. It allows you to claim without any kind of a contract. As long as you meet requirements, you can claim. If you choose not to, or if you don't comply, I don't like to use the word comply, but don't meet the requirements. All there is what we fill out a voluntary notice of non-participation saying you're not going to participate anymore. So there's nothing to get out. Now, it's different if you sign a 15, and we're getting a little in depth on this. If you're in an agricultural enterprise area and you sign a 15-year agreement, then you're pretty well locked in for that 15 years.
Right.
Yeah.
But with just the zoning aspect of it,
Yeah.
you would be, and even if you're zoned exclusive ag, you'd have to abide by the regulations in that zoning district, but you wouldn't have to claim the credits, and there's no penalty for not claiming them, or if you don't meet the standards and don't claim them, you just don't have the credits there. And then at any point, if you wish to rezone out of it, then it would be the $415 if you were doing it as a personal rezone out, and that would be the application to us. And then that process we talked about earlier, where we go to
Special exemption?
Well, no, in the rezone, it would be from us. The application comes in, goes to the town discusses it. If it passes the town, then it would come to LCZ, they look at it, and it goes to the county board for final approvals. As that, otherwise, and there's no other fee besides that $415. That's an application fee there. There used to be a conversion factor that lasted about 6 months, and that was tossed out for rezoning of it. There is penalties if there's a contract signed in some of those areas, but if there's no contract, and even if you're in an ADA district and you haven't signed a contract, there's no penalties, no nothing. It's voluntary. Voluntarily, if you wish to collect those credits or not. So.
Current zoning practice is going to stay in place if the township continues to take county zoning? Or is this gonna change the whole thing? May not we, for example, live in an exclusive ag area, but there's been one segment of our property that's been rezoned.
Right now, we're only looking at changing the exclusive agricultural zoning district in the whole zoning code. When the whole code opens up, then we'll be looking at all those other districts that are in there, the commercials, the industrial.
It's just another level of ag.
And yeah, that's one of them. So all of those will be looked at that point. These aren't being touched.
If that was once approved, is there a potential, because I'd like to get a head start. If that's gonna be the case, because I wanna know what about that. So, is there a possibility somebody could all of a sudden say, well, that used to be the way it was, but it's not gonna be that way?
Well, with any zoning, whatever's there at the time of rezone, or if it would change something, it's still a permitted use on that property until it becomes like a non-conforming use, basically. As long as it's being used, if it doesn't go for a 12-month period of not being used, then it would revert back to, then it would have to be changed or upgraded or rezoned, that aspect of it. Right now, I can tell you that there's going to be some sort of industrial, some sort of regular ag, some sort of commercial district, an exclusive agricultural district. Many of the permitted uses that are in those districts are going to be allowed. And that's what in the same aspect that we're looking at here, there's going to have to be these town meetings with the residents and everything, but almost more in depth, because it's going to be like starting from scratch and almost looking at every property, what's happening there. So if it's commercial now, we'll have to look at it, what's on the property, what's happening there. If it doesn't fit in commercial zoning of the new one, but it fits into light industrial, just a goofy scenario, but we would want to have it zoned at that time right to light industrial for that purpose. Vice versa, if it's just single family residential and you don't want it ag anymore and you got a little area and you want it residential of some sort, at that point, that's where they're going to look at it and want it zoned. So, the town board's going to have to look at it, they're going to approve these maps. But they're going to need the residents to tell them what's happening on that property too. And actually, we were just up in Harrison a couple of weeks ago, and they asked the question, well, does the county just go out and, okay, it's ag zoning, go through the whole thing? No, we have to look at every individual property with the town and everybody, so we're not making non-conforming uses. We don't want to put the residents, because that's limiting what you can do, expansion and everything else. We don't want that to happen. We want you to have a conforming use, conforming structures all on the property. That's what we want. So you can do an addition if you wish to expand and grow that way. So. Any other questions? I know my business card's over there. Kurt's got his cards here too. Feel free, our email addresses are on there too. Shoot us an email, phone call, letter. Tell you right now, if it's more conservation standard, of barnyard standards and all that, Kirk is probably the guy to go to on those. Zoning, more my direction, but either which way, if you have multiples, you can send it to one, we'll get an answer back to you on there, so.
One question, what about the livestock sighting? Should each township have an ordinance for that?
Right now it's countywide.
It's countywide.
Yep, the county has the livestock licensing that's countywide. I'm not the expert on that, but when it was adopted, there was the option where and you'll see other parts of the state where some towns have adopted it.
Mm-hmm.
If the county didn't act on it, then the town might have felt it was important and they would act on it individually. But right now it's countywide in Marathon County.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.